A young boy saves a stranger's life, unaware of the hidden truth she carries. As he uncovers her secret, everything he thought he knew begins to change. What happens next will take an unexpected turn. Stick around, because the truth is more shocking than you can imagine. Malik pushed open the rusty gate of his apartment building, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. It was a warm afternoon, and he could hear the distant sounds of kids playing basketball at the nearby court. As he walked down the cracked sidewalk, his mind wandered to the science project he needed to finish that night. He turned the corner, already planning out his evening when something caught his eye. Lying on the ground near the bus stop was a woman, barely moving. Her clothes were dirty, her hair matted, and her face pale. Malik slowed down, unsure of what to do. A few people passed by without so much as a glance, their hurried steps matching the bustling city around them. Malik bit his lip. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. "Boy, you've got a good heart. Don't you ever forget to use it." His feet felt like they had a mind of their own as he moved closer to the woman. She was breathing, but faintly. Malik knelt beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Miss," he called out softly, his voice shaking. The woman didn't respond. Malik reached into his pocket for his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" a calm voice answered. There's a woman here. I think she's sick or something. She's not moving much," Malik stammered, glancing nervously around, hoping someone else would help. But the people passing by didn't stop. "Where are you located?" the operator asked, and Malik quickly gave the address, trying his best to stay calm. "An ambulance is on the way. Stay with her if you can," the operator added before hanging up. Malik crouched back down next to the woman, feeling a surge of worry. He could hear her shallow breathing, and it scared him. "Hang in there," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He took off his backpack and placed it under her head, trying to make her more comfortable. For a moment he considered running to get help from a nearby store, but something kept him there, rooted to the spot. Minutes felt like hours, but soon enough Malik heard the sound of sirens approaching. The ambulance pulled up, and 2 paramedics rushed out. They quickly assessed the woman, speaking in medical terms Malik didn't understand. One of them glanced at him, surprise evident in her eyes. "Did you call this in?" she asked, her tone softening. Malik nodded, standing up and stepping back to give them space. His heart raced as he watched them load the woman onto the stretcher. "You did good, kid," the paramedic said before they shut the doors and sped off, leaving Malik standing alone on the street. For a moment Malik felt proud, but that feeling quickly turned into concern. Who was this woman? What had happened to her? And more importantly, would she be okay? As he slung his backpack over his shoulder and began the walk home, Malik couldn't shake the image of her face. Something about the whole situation felt unfinished, like a puzzle with a missing piece. He had done what he could, but the question stayed with him, lingering in the back of his mind. And in the quiet corners of the city, those questions were only just beginning to unravel. That night, Malik lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the image of the woman from his mind. He kept thinking about how fragile she had looked, her body barely moving, her face pale as though life had been drained from her. His grandmother had always told him that it wasn't his job to solve other people's problems, but Malik couldn't help feeling responsible for her somehow. He had found her when no one else cared enough to stop. The next morning, as he got ready for school, Malik couldn't resist asking his grandmother about the situation. "Grandma," he began cautiously over breakfast, "what would you do if you found someone hurt or sick on the street?" His grandmother, a short but sturdy woman with kind eyes, looked at him over her coffee mug. She raised an eyebrow. "Why you asking me something like that? You all right, boy?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Just curious," Malik replied, trying to sound casual. He took a bite of his toast, hoping she wouldn't press further. "Well, if you found somebody like that, you do what you can, right? Help them. You don't just walk by like some folks do." She sipped her coffee. "But after that, you gotta let it go. Can't be worrying about things you can't control. You did your part, and that's all you can do." Malik nodded, though the answer didn't sit well with him. Letting go wasn't something he was good at, especially when he didn't have all the answers. He finished his breakfast quickly, grabbed his backpack, and left for school. All day, the scene from the previous afternoon played on a loop in his mind. By the time the final bell rang, Malik had made up his mind. He couldn't just forget about what happened. Not yet. There was something about the way the woman had looked at him, something in her faint, distant eyes that stayed with him. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe it was more. He needed to know if she was okay. After school, instead of heading home, Malik took the bus to the hospital. It was the same hospital the paramedics had taken her to, and though he had no idea how to find out anything, he figured it was worth a try. When he arrived, Malik felt a little out of place. The lobby was big and intimidating, filled with rushing nurses and people waiting anxiously. He approached the front desk, feeling his palms sweat. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist, a woman who barely looked up from her computer screen. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tired and uninterested. Malik hesitated. I'm looking for someone, a woman. I don't know her name, but she was brought here yesterday. I found her on the street. She was in pretty bad shape." The receptionist's fingers clicked on the keyboard for a moment. She glanced up at Malik, sizing him up. "We can't give out patient information like that, especially if you're not family." Malik felt his stomach drop. He had come all this way for nothing. "But is she okay?" he asked, his voice soft and hopeful. "I just want to know if she's okay." The woman sighed, clearly seeing the worry on his face. "I'm sorry, kid. I really can't help you." Disappointment washed over him, and Malik turned to leave, feeling worse than when he had come in. But as he walked toward the exit, a voice stopped him. "You looking for the woman from yesterday?" Malik turned to see a nurse standing by a cart of medical supplies. She looked around cautiously, then motioned for him to come closer. "I remember her," the nurse whispered. "She woke up, but she left this morning, discharged herself, didn't say where she was going." "Left? Just like that?" Malik was stunned. After everything, she had just disappeared? "Yeah, she was in a hurry. Didn't leave any info." "Sorry, kid," the nurse said before returning to her duties. Malik stood there, stunned. The woman had vanished, leaving behind more questions than answers. As he left the hospital, a gnawing feeling of unfinished business settled deeper in his chest. Something wasn't right, and somehow, he knew this wasn't the last he would hear of her. The walk home from the hospital felt heavier than usual. Malik replayed the nurse's words in his head, trying to make sense of it. The woman had just disappeared without leaving a trace. No name, no explanation. It felt strange, too strange. What kind of person would leave the hospital so quickly, especially after being in such bad shape? By the time Malik got back to his neighborhood, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. He shoved his hands into his pockets, thinking about what his grandma had said. "You did your part, and that's all you can do." But somehow, it didn't feel like enough. As he turned the corner toward his building, he noticed a group of older boys hanging out near the basketball court, leaning against the fence. Malik recognized a few of them from school, kids who were always up to something. They were laughing loudly, passing around a basketball, but when they spotted him, the mood changed. "Yo, Malik," one of the boys called out, jogging over. It was Jaden, a tall, lanky guy with a constant smirk on his face. "Heard you were playing hero yesterday, man. Helping some homeless lady or something. What's up with that?" Malik tensed. He hadn't told anyone about what happened, but word spread fast around the neighborhood. "She needed help," he said simply, trying to keep walking. Jaden stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Nah, man, for real. Why you even bother? People like that, they ain't gonna help you. You just wasting your time." One of the other boys snickered, tossing the basketball up in the air. "For real, though, she probably don't even remember you. Bet she's already back on the streets begging for change." Malik's hands balled into fists. He didn't know why, but their words stung more than he expected. "You don't know anything about her," he muttered, trying to push past Jaden. Jaden's smirk faded, replaced by something colder. "Aight, whatever, man. But don't come crying when you realize people like that don't change. You'll see." Ignoring him, Malik quickened his pace, his heart pounding with frustration. He knew the boys were wrong, but part of him couldn't shake the doubt that crept in. What if they were right? What if the woman had already disappeared back into the streets, her life unchanged? That night, Malik tried to focus on his homework, but his mind kept drifting. His grandma had gone to bed early, and the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the TV in the living room. He stared down at the math problems in front of him, but the numbers blurred together. His thoughts kept circling back to the woman, her pale face, her empty eyes. Who was she? Why had she left the hospital so quickly? Unable to concentrate, Malik finally gave up. He closed his textbook and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. It was late, but he couldn't sleep with all the questions swirling in his head. The next morning, Malik decided to do something he rarely did: talk to someone about it. His best friend, Jamal, was the kind of guy who didn't get worked up about much. If anyone could help him make sense of things, it would be him. During lunch at school, Malik found Jamal sitting at their usual spot in the cafeteria. Jamal was busy munching on a sandwich, headphones around his neck. Malik slid into the seat across from him and immediately started talking, spilling out everything that had been eating away at him since yesterday. Jamal listened, nodding occasionally, his face thoughtful as Malik told him about the woman, the hospital, and how she vanished without a word. When Malik finally finished, Jamal sat back, chewing thoughtfully before speaking. "So, you're saying you saved this lady, and now she's just gone?" "Yeah," Malik sighed. "And I can't stop thinking about it, like, who was she? Why'd she leave like that? I don't get it." Jamal shrugged, tossing the rest of his sandwich into his lunch bag. "I mean, maybe she had her reasons. Some people don't want to be found, you know? Maybe she's just trying to get away from something." Malik frowned. "But what?" "That's the part you don't know yet, bro," Jamal said, leaning in. "But if it's really bothering you, maybe you should try to find her. I mean, it's not like she just disappeared into thin air, right?" The idea stuck in Malik's mind. Maybe Jamal was right. Maybe there was a reason behind all of this, something bigger that he wasn't seeing. And maybe it wasn't too late to figure it out. The idea of finding her wouldn't leave Malik alone. It sat in the back of his mind, growing louder each day. By the time the weekend came around, he knew he had to do something. He couldn't just let it go, not without answers. Saturday morning, Malik told his grandmother he was going to hang out with Jamal, which wasn't a total lie. He planned to meet Jamal later, but first, he wanted to head back to the spot where he had found the woman. Maybe someone there knew something. Maybe someone had seen her since then. As he walked through the familiar streets, the memories from that day resurfaced. The woman lying on the ground, people walking past without a second glance, his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as he made the call for help. Malik didn't know what he expected to find, but he had to start somewhere. The corner near the bus stop was quiet when Malik arrived. A few people stood waiting for the bus, scrolling through their phones or chatting in low voices, but there was no sign of the woman. He glanced around, trying to spot anything out of place, but everything looked ordinary. Frustrated, he wandered over to a small convenience store nearby. The old man behind the counter was someone Malik had seen around for years. If anyone had noticed something, it might be him. Malik walked inside, the bell above the door jingling as he entered. The store smelled of cleaning products and stale chips, and the man behind the counter barely looked up as Malik approached. "Excuse me, sir," Malik began, his voice polite but urgent. "I was here the other day, and there was a woman. She was in bad shape, lying on the ground near the bus stop. I called an ambulance for her. Do you remember her? Did you see anything?" The man squinted at Malik, then scratched his graying beard. "A woman, huh? Near the bus stop?" He paused for a moment, thinking. "I might have seen her. Lots of people come through here, though. She one of them homeless folks?" "I don't know," Malik admitted. She didn't look good. I was just wondering if maybe you saw her after that, or know anything about her." The old man shook his head slowly. "Can't say I know much. A lot of them come and go. Some stay in shelters, some just wander. But if she's the one I'm thinking of, she used to be around here a lot. Kept to herself mostly." Malik's heart skipped a beat. "You've seen her before?" "Maybe. Don't get too many details from folks like that. They don't usually stick around long enough, but yeah, I've seen her once or twice. She looked rough last time, though. Guess you did her a favor calling the ambulance." The man gave a shrug, then went back to wiping down the counter. Malik thanked him and left the store, feeling a little more hopeful. At least now he knew she'd been around before. But where would she go after leaving the hospital? If she didn't have a home, there was only one other place Malik could think of: the shelter. Malik made his way to the shelter a few blocks away, a place he'd seen in passing but never visited. The building was old, with chipped paint and a line of people waiting outside. Most of them looked tired, worn down by the streets, their faces weathered with years of hardship. He approached the entrance, feeling out of place and unsure of how to go about this. The woman at the front desk, a tired-looking volunteer with short hair and glasses, gave him a curious glance as he walked up. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. Malik hesitated. Yeah, I'm looking for someone. A woman who might have been here recently. I don't know her name, but she's been in bad shape. I found her the other day and she was taken to the hospital, but she left. I was hoping maybe she came here." The volunteer tilted her head, considering his words. "We get a lot of people coming through, but I can't give out personal information unless you're family." "I'm not," Malik admitted, feeling a familiar knot of disappointment forming in his stomach. "But could you at least tell me if anyone like that has been here? Just anything?" The woman sighed, softening her tone. "I'm sorry, but without a name, it's hard to say. We see a lot of people in and out of here. But if she was discharged from the hospital, she might have gone somewhere else. People usually come here if they're looking for a place to stay. But not everyone does." Malik nodded, trying to hide his frustration. He thanked her and left, his mind racing. He had hit another dead end, and now the uncertainty gnawed at him even more. She was still out there somewhere, and he had no idea where or why she had disappeared so quickly. As Malik walked back toward his neighborhood, the city felt different. Larger, more complicated. He was just a kid trying to piece together a mystery that seemed far beyond his reach. But something inside him wouldn't let go. He wasn't done yet. As Malik walked back home, the cold air brushing against his face, the frustration of hitting another dead end weighed on him. His mind was spinning with thoughts, questions he had no answers for. He knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just leave it alone. There had to be something, some clue he was missing. Back at his apartment, Malik found Jamal sitting on the front steps, waiting for him. Jamal looked up from his phone and raised an eyebrow as Malik approached. "Where you been? You didn't answer my texts." "Sorry, man," Malik muttered, sitting down beside him. "I went back to that spot where I found the woman, tried asking around, but I didn't find much." Jamal nodded slowly. "I figured. You really think you're gonna find her, though? I mean, she could be anywhere by now." "I don't know," Malik admitted, "but I can't shake the feeling that something's not right. She was too, I don't know, different, and she left the hospital so fast." Jamal tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Different how?" "I don't know," Malik said, shaking his head. "It's hard to explain. The way she looked at me, like she was hiding something, like she didn't want to be found." Jamal shrugged. "Maybe she didn't. Some people, when life hits them hard, they just want to disappear." "Yeah, but I need to know why," Malik said quietly. "I feel like there's more to her story." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city filling the air around them. Cars honking in the distance, people walking by, the occasional shout from across the street. Malik stared at the ground, his thoughts swirling, when suddenly Jamal spoke up. "You said she might have been homeless, right?" Malik nodded. Okay, so if she's been out here for a while, maybe someone else has seen her, Jamal suggested. You know, like one of the street vendors or people who are always around. Malik's eyes widened. That's actually a good idea. The vendors see everything. They're out there all day. Excited by this new lead, Malik stood up. I think I know where to start. Jamal looked surprised but followed him as Malik hurried toward the corner where the bus stop was. There was an older man who ran a small food cart there, selling hot dogs and pretzels. Malik had seen him for years, always around, always watching the world go by. When they arrived, the man was standing behind his cart, grilling onions and sausages. The scent of sizzling food filled the air, making Malik's stomach growl, but he pushed the hunger aside and approached the vendor. Excuse me, sir, Malik began, his voice polite but urgent. Can I ask you something? The vendor, a gruff-looking man with a thick mustache, looked down at Malik with mild curiosity. Yeah, kid, what do you need? I'm looking for someone, a woman, Malik said, glancing nervously at Jamal before continuing. I found her here a few days ago and she was in bad shape. She got taken to the hospital, but she disappeared. Have you seen her? She was here before. Maybe you've seen her around. The vendor frowned, wiping his hands on a towel. A woman, huh? Lots of people come through here, but yeah, I remember her. Malik's heart skipped. You do? Yeah, she used to come by every now and then. Never really bought anything, though, the vendor said, scratching his head as if trying to recall more. I think she hung around here for a bit, but she always kept to herself. Seemed like she had some stuff going on, you know. People who come through like that, they don't always stay long. Malik nodded, feeling a rush of excitement. Did she ever say anything, like did she ever talk about where she was staying or anything like that? The vendor shook his head. Nah, not really. She wasn't much of a talker. But now that I think about it, a couple weeks back I saw her talking to some guy near the alley over there. Looked like they knew each other. Haven't seen her since, though. A guy? Malik asked, confused. What did he look like? The vendor shrugged. Dunno, some older guy. He was wearing a suit, which was weird because you don't see a lot of people in suits around here. Seemed out of place, but he was talking to her for a while. I didn't hear what they were saying. Malik exchanged a glance with Jamal. A man in a suit? That was definitely strange. Thanks, Malik said, feeling a mix of relief and curiosity. That helps a lot. No problem, kid, the vendor said, returning to his work. As Malik and Jamal walked away, Jamal let out a low whistle. A guy in a suit? What's that about? Maybe she's got some connections we don't know about. Maybe, Malik said thoughtfully. But why would someone like that be talking to her in this neighborhood? Jamal grinned. Looks like you've got yourself a real mystery, my guy. Malik couldn't help but agree. The puzzle was getting more complicated by the minute, and now there was another layer to it. Who was the man in the suit? And what did he have to do with the woman Malik had saved? One thing was certain. This was far from over. The next day, Malik could barely focus in school. His mind kept drifting to the crumpled note in his pocket and what might be waiting for them on 12th Street in Lindenwood. Every time the teacher called on him, he snapped out of his thoughts just long enough to give an answer. But he couldn't shake the sense of anticipation and fear that was gnawing at him. When the final bell rang, Malik didn't waste any time. He met up with Jamal near the school's back gate, where they usually hung out after class. Jamal was already waiting, hands shoved deep in his hoodie pockets, looking more serious than usual. You sure about this, man? Jamal asked, giving Malik a sideways glance. Lindenwood's no joke. We gotta be smart. Malik nodded, though the nervousness bubbling inside him was hard to ignore. I know, but this is the only lead we've got. We'll be careful. They walked to the bus stop in silence, both of them knowing that this wasn't like the other neighborhoods they were used to. Lindenwood had a reputation for being rough, a place where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. It wasn't somewhere you went without a reason. When they got off the bus, the change in atmosphere hit them instantly. The streets were quieter here, but not in a peaceful way. The buildings were older, more worn down, with graffiti covering the walls and broken windows in some places. People hung out in small groups on street corners, watching as Malik and Jamal walked by. Malik tried to keep his head down, but his heart was racing. He could feel eyes on them, could sense the tension in the air. This wasn't their neighborhood. They didn't belong here, and everyone seemed to know it. They reached 12th Street a few minutes later. Malik pulled out the crumpled note from his pocket, staring at the messy handwriting. There was no specific address, no directions, just Lindenwood, 12th Street. But the street stretched for several blocks, lined with old brick buildings, boarded-up storefronts, and the occasional rundown apartment complex. "So what now?" Jamal asked, his voice low. "We just start knocking on doors?" Malik shook his head. "No, let's just walk around first. Maybe we'll see something." They walked slowly down the street, trying not to draw too much attention, though Malik could feel curious eyes following them. They passed an old convenience store, its windows dirty and cracked, and a bar with a flickering neon sign, but nothing stood out. No sign of the woman or the mysterious man in the suit. As they turned the corner onto another block, Malik noticed a group of men standing outside a small corner store, talking quietly. They were older, wearing dark jackets, their faces hard and serious. Malik's heart skipped a beat. One of them was wearing a suit, an odd sight in this neighborhood, just like the vendor had described. "Jamal," Malik whispered, nodding toward the group. "That guy, he's wearing a suit." Jamal followed his gaze, eyes widening. "Yo, you think that's him?" "Maybe," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's keep walking, see if we can hear anything." They walked past the group, trying to act casual, but Malik's ears were tuned to their conversation. At first, he couldn't make out much, just low murmurs broken up by the occasional cough or laugh. But then, just as they were about to turn the corner, Malik heard something that made his blood run cold. "She's not gonna stay hidden forever. We'll find her." Malik stopped in his tracks. Jamal gave him a confused look, but Malik couldn't move. He stood frozen, his mind racing. Could they be talking about the woman? The one he had found? "Malik, what's wrong?" Jamal hissed, tugging at his sleeve. "Come on, let's go." But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that they were onto something. He glanced back at the group of men, watching as the one in the suit lit a cigarette and said something else, his voice too low for Malik to hear. "We need to get closer," Malik whispered, his voice trembling. Jamal stared at him like he was crazy. "Closer? Man, are you out of your mind? Those dudes look dangerous. We can't just walk up to them." "I know," Malik said, his pulse racing. "But they're talking about her, Jamal. They know something." Jamal hesitated, then sighed. "All right, fine. But we gotta be careful. No stupid moves." They stayed in the shadows, keeping their distance as they circled back toward the men. Malik's heart pounded in his chest, and his palms were sweaty as they crouched behind an old dumpster, trying to stay out of sight. The men were still talking, their voices a little clearer now. "If she shows her face here again, she's done. She can't run forever." Malik's stomach twisted. They were definitely talking about her, the woman he had saved. But what had she done? And why were they after her? The man in the suit crushed his cigarette under his shoe, then turned to the others. "We need to lock this down. If anyone sees her, they let me know. No mistakes." Malik exchanged a worried glance with Jamal. Whatever was going on, it was way bigger than they had thought. The woman was in serious trouble, and these men were dangerous. They needed to get out of there before they were seen. "Let's go," Malik whispered, pulling Jamal by the sleeve. They slipped away quietly, their hearts pounding in their chests. Malik's mind raced as they hurried back toward the bus stop. Everything was becoming clearer and more terrifying. The woman wasn't just running away from something small. She was hiding from dangerous people, people who were actively looking for her, and Malik had been the one to help her. As they reached the bus stop, Malik felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had wanted to find her, to help her, but now he realized he was stepping into something much bigger than he'd expected. This wasn't just about finding a stranger. It was about saving someone's life. They got on the bus, the tension between them thick and heavy. Jamal broke the silence after a few minutes. "Man, what do we do now? We just found out these dudes are after her, and they ain't playing around." Malik stared out the window, his mind racing. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but we can't stop now. She's in danger, and we might be the only ones who can help her." The bus ride back to their neighborhood was quiet. Malik stared out the window, watching the city blur past, his mind tangled in knots. The weight of what he and Jamal had overheard kept replaying in his head. The men were searching for her, probably the woman he'd saved. But why? What could she have done to make them so determined to find her? When they finally stepped off the bus, Jamal turned to Malik, his face serious. "We gotta be careful, man. This ain't just some mystery anymore. Those guys, they sounded serious. If they're looking for her and we get in the middle of it..." Malik knew Jamal was right. This was dangerous, and the last thing they wanted was to get caught up in something bigger than they could handle. But Malik also knew that walking away wasn't an option anymore. He couldn't just forget about her. Not now. "I know," Malik said, his voice low. "But we're already in it. We're the only ones who know what's going on." Jamal sighed, shaking his head. "Man, I don't know. This feels like it's way above our pay grade." "It is," Malik admitted. "But what if no one else helps her? We already found out more than anyone else knows. We have to see this through." Jamal rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uneasy. All right, but we gotta be smart about this. No more sneaking around those dudes. We need to figure out who she is, what she's running from, and we can't get caught while we do it." Malik agreed. They needed a plan, something that would help them piece together who the woman was and why she was being hunted. He had a feeling that once they figured out her identity, the rest would fall into place. Later that night, Malik sat in his room, staring at his phone. He hadn't told his grandmother anything about what had been going on. She would have freaked out if she knew he had been in Lindenwood, let alone near a group of dangerous men. But he needed answers, and there was only one other place he could think to search: online. He knew it was a long shot, but if the woman was hiding from someone, maybe her name had popped up in some news stories. She could have been involved in something, or maybe there had been reports about her disappearance. Malik wasn't sure what he was looking for, but it was worth a try. He spent hours searching, typing in vague descriptions: woman missing, homeless woman, Lindenwood. He even searched for news about crimes in the area, but nothing seemed to connect. His eyes blurred from staring at the screen for so long, and just as he was about to give up, something caught his eye. An old article popped up on his search. The headline read, "City Councilwoman steps down amid scandal, disappears from public life." Malik's heart raced as he clicked on the link. The article was dated 3 years ago, and as he scrolled down, a familiar face stared back at him from the screen. It was her, the woman he had saved. Her name was Angela Porter, and she hadn't just disappeared. She had been a public figure, someone important. According to the article, she had resigned from her position as a city councilwoman after being implicated in a scandal involving corruption and missing city funds. But after she stepped down, she vanished. No one had seen or heard from her since. Malik's breath caught in his throat as he read the details. Angela Porter had been accused of stealing thousands of dollars meant for public housing projects, money that was supposed to help families in need. The media had painted her as a villain, someone who had taken advantage of her position for personal gain. But there were no criminal charges, and the investigation had gone cold. No one knew where she went after she resigned. Malik sat back stunned. Angela Porter, the woman who had been lying on the street, the one he had saved, wasn't just anyone. She had been involved in something huge, and now it made sense why she was hiding. If the men in the suit were looking for her, it could be connected to her past. Maybe they wanted revenge, or maybe they were part of the scandal she had been wrapped up in. Whatever the reason, Malik knew one thing for sure. Angela was in danger because of something she had been a part of years ago, and he had stumbled right into the middle of it. He sent a quick text to Jamal, telling him what he had found. Jamal responded almost immediately, his message short and urgent. Jamal. Yo, this just got real. Malik knew they were in deep now. It wasn't just about finding Angela anymore. It was about protecting her, maybe even figuring out the truth behind the scandal that had taken her down. But there was still so much they didn't know. They needed to find her before the men in the suits did, and they needed to do it fast. The next morning, Malik met Jamal outside the school. Both of them were tense, their minds still spinning from the discovery the night before. We gotta find her, Malik said, his voice low. Before they do. Jamal nodded, his expression serious. But how? We don't even know where she is. Malik thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone, rereading the article about Angela. There was something about the case that didn't add up. If she had been innocent, why didn't she defend herself? Why disappear completely? We need more information, Malik said, thinking out loud. There has to be someone who knows what really happened. Someone who can tell us where she might be. Jamal frowned. And who's that? Malik thought for a moment, then his eyes widened as an idea formed. What if we talk to her old colleagues? Someone who worked with her? Maybe they know where she went. Jamal raised an eyebrow. You think they'll just tell us we're just a couple of kids? Maybe, Malik said, shrugging. But it's worth a shot. We can find out who worked with her, see if anyone's still around. Jamal sighed, but Malik could tell he was on board. All right, let's do it. But we better be careful. This ain't just a game anymore. Malik nodded, feeling the weight of Jamal's words. This wasn't just a mystery to solve. It was a race against time. And the more they uncovered, the more dangerous things became. But they couldn't stop now. After school, Malik and Jamal headed to the public library. Malik figured it was the best place to start digging into Angela Porter's past, especially if they needed to track down people who used to work with her. The library was quiet as usual, the smell of old books filling the air, and Malik found some comfort in that, even though his nerves were on edge. They took seats in a corner near the computer section, where Malik pulled out his phone and started scrolling through the article again. Angela had been involved in city council projects that dealt with housing and community programs, and it seemed like her downfall came after money went missing from those projects. But the more he read, the less it made sense. Angela had been well liked by many, praised for her dedication to helping low-income families. How could someone like that suddenly steal thousands of dollars? Yo, this doesn't add up, Malik muttered, scrolling down the article as Jamal peered over his shoulder. If she was so corrupt, why didn't they press charges? Jamal shrugged, frowning. Maybe she had connections, people covering for her. Or maybe, Malik said, a thought forming. Maybe she didn't do it, maybe she was framed. Jamal blinked in surprise. Framed? You think she got set up? It's possible, Malik said. I mean, the investigation just stopped, and she disappeared. What if someone wanted her out of the way? They could have made her look guilty, and when she couldn't prove her innocence, she ran. Jamal nodded slowly, considering the idea. Okay, so if she didn't do it, who did? And why are these dudes still after her now? That's what we need to figure out, Malik said, determined. Let's see if we can find out who else was involved in those projects. Maybe someone who worked with her back then knows more. They spent the next hour searching through old news articles and city records, trying to piece together a timeline of events leading up to Angela's resignation. It didn't take long to find the names of other people who had been on the city council with her. One name in particular kept popping up, Richard Solomon, the head of the housing committee at the time. Check this guy out, Jamal said, pointing to the screen. He was her boss, and he's the one who led the investigation into the missing funds. That's kind of fishy, don't you think? Malik nodded, his gut telling him they were onto something. Yeah. What if he's the one behind it? He could have framed her to get her out of the way. But why? Jamal asked. What's he get out of it? I don't know yet, Malik admitted, frustration creeping into his voice. But it looks like Solomon's still in politics. He's running for mayor now. Jamal let out a low whistle. Mayor, that's big. So if he was dirty and Angela knew it? Malik finished his thought. Then she'd be a threat to him. That's why they're still after her. Jamal leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. Man, this just keeps getting crazier. So you think we need to talk to this Solomon guy? Malik bit his lip, unsure. I don't know. He's too powerful. If he's involved in something shady, he's not going to tell us the truth. But maybe there's someone else we can talk to. Someone who worked with both of them and might know what really happened. They continued their search, going through lists of former city council members and staff who had worked on the housing projects during Angela's time. After scrolling through countless names, they found one that stood out. Linda Marsh, a former assistant who had worked closely with both Angela and Solomon. There, Malik said, pointing at the screen. She was part of the housing committee too, but she quit a few months before Angela resigned. Jamal raised an eyebrow. You think she knows something? Maybe, Malik said, feeling a flicker of hope. If anyone knows the truth, it's probably her. Malik jotted down Linda Marsh's name and started searching for any recent information about her. It didn't take long to find out that she had retired from politics after leaving her position on the council. According to the city's directory, she lived in a quiet neighborhood not far from Malik's school. We should try talking to her, Malik said, determination growing in his voice. If she's not involved in the scandal, she might help us figure out where Angela went. Jamal looked uneasy but nodded. All right, but we gotta be careful. We don't know if she's still mixed up in all this. The plan was set. They would visit Linda Marsh's house after school the next day. Malik felt a surge of nervous excitement, knowing they were getting closer to the truth. But he also knew that the closer they got, the more dangerous it would become. Malik and Jamal exchanged nervous glances as they stepped into Linda Marsh's house. The air inside felt heavy, like the walls had absorbed years of secrets. Malik's heart pounded, not sure what to expect, but knowing this was a critical moment. Linda led them into a small living room, motioning for them to sit on the worn-out couch. She sat in an armchair across from them, her sharp eyes studying their faces. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Malik could feel the tension in the air, but he forced himself to stay calm. So, Linda began, folding her hands in her lap. You're trying to help Angela Porter. That's quite the mission for two kids. We're not just kids, Malik said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I found her. I saved her, but now she's disappeared, and there are people after her. We think it has something to do with the scandal from a few years ago. At the mention of the scandal, Linda's eyes darkened, and she let out a tired sigh. You're right, it does, but it's not what everyone thinks. What really happened? Jamal asked, leaning forward. Linda hesitated, as if weighing whether to tell them the truth. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and serious. Angela was framed. That money that went missing? It wasn't her doing. She was trying to stop it, but she got too close to the truth and they made her the scapegoat. Who's they? Malik asked, his pulse quickening. Linda's face hardened. Richard Solomon, and a few others on the council. They were involved in a scheme to siphon off funds from the housing projects. Angela found out about it. She was too honest to let it slide, so she started digging, trying to expose them. But Solomon, he's a powerful man. He found out what she was up to and turned the tables on her. Malik's stomach twisted. He had suspected Solomon was dirty, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real and dangerous. They set her up, Linda continued. Made it look like she was the one stealing the money. Solomon had connections with the media, and before Angela knew what hit her, her reputation was destroyed. She had no choice but to resign, and after that, she disappeared. I don't know where she went, but it's clear she's been hiding ever since. Jamal shook his head in disbelief. That's messed up. So she's been on the run for something she didn't even do? Linda nodded, her face grim. Exactly. And now that Solomon's running for mayor, he doesn't want any skeletons coming out of the closet. If Angela resurfaces, she could expose everything, so they're trying to find her before she can talk. Malik felt a cold chill run down his spine. Everything made sense now. The men they had seen in Lindenwood, the suit, the conversations about finding her. It all pointed back to Solomon and his fear of being exposed. "So, what do we do?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Linda looked at him with a mix of sadness and determination. "You need to find Angela before they do. She's the only one who can bring Solomon down, but she can't do it alone. She'll need proof of what really happened, and she'll need people who believe in her." "But we don't even know where she is," Jamal said, frustration creeping into his voice. Linda leaned forward, her expression softening. "I don't know where she is either, but I do know that she still has allies, people she trusted, even after the scandal. If anyone can help you find her, it's them." She reached for a small notebook on the coffee table, flipping through the pages until she found what she was looking for. "There's a man named Carl Grayson. He used to work in the housing department with Angela. He was one of the few people she confided in before everything fell apart. He's retired now, but if anyone knows how to reach her, it's him." Linda tore out the page and handed it to Malik. "Here's his address. He lives on the outskirts of the city. Keeps to himself these days, but he's a good man. If you explain what's going on, he might be able to help you." Malik took the paper, feeling a surge of hope. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Linda gave a small nod. "I wish I could do more, but I've been out of the game for a long time. And you need to be careful, both of you. Solomon's people are watching. If they catch wind of what you're doing, they won't hesitate to silence you." Malik swallowed hard. He had known this was dangerous, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made it feel even more real. He and Jamal were in deep now, and the stakes couldn't be higher. "We'll be careful," Malik promised. Linda stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "I hope you find her. Angela deserves justice after everything they've done to her." As they left Linda's house and stepped out into the cool evening air, Malik's mind raced. The truth about Angela was finally starting to come together, but there were still so many unanswered questions. Where was she? And how would they find her before Solomon's men did? Jamal let out a long breath. Well, that was intense. "Yeah," Malik agreed, tucking the address into his pocket. "But at least now we know what we're dealing with. We need to find Carl Grayson. He's our best shot at finding Angela." Jamal nodded, though he still looked uneasy. "Man, this is serious. We're talking about taking down a politician. If Solomon's as bad as she says, we could be in way over our heads." "I know," Malik said quietly. "But we've come too far to turn back now. Angela's counting on us, even if she doesn't know it yet." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their mission hanging between them. Malik knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he couldn't let fear stop him. Angela's life, and the truth, was on the line. Tomorrow they would track down Carl Grayson, and with any luck they'd finally find Angela before it was too late. The next day after school, Malik and Jamal headed toward the address Linda had given them. Carl Grayson lived in a quiet, almost forgotten part of the city, far from the busy streets and towering buildings they were used to. The houses were older, spaced farther apart, with overgrown lawns and cracked driveways. It felt like a different world, one where time had slowed down, leaving behind the hustle of city life. As they walked down the narrow street, Malik felt the weight of their mission pressing down on him. Finding Carl Grayson wasn't just about getting more information. It was about finding a way to save Angela from whatever Solomon and his men had planned. Malik knew they were running out of time. "That's the place," Jamal said, pointing to a small weathered house at the end of the street. The paint was peeling, and the roof looked like it hadn't been fixed in years. But there was something sturdy about it, like it had stood through storms and hard times, yet refused to fall. Malik's nerves were buzzing as they walked up the driveway. "You think he'll help us?" Jamal asked, his voice low. "I hope so," Malik replied, trying to steady his racing heart. "He's our best shot." They reached the front door, and for a moment, Malik hesitated, unsure of what to say. He glanced at Jamal, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. Finally, Malik raised his hand and knocked. It took a minute before they heard the sound of footsteps approaching the door. The door creaked open, revealing an older man with graying hair and a scruffy beard. His face was lined with age, and his eyes, though tired, held a sharpness that hadn't faded with time. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Are you Carl Grayson?" Malik asked, trying to sound as calm as possible. The man narrowed his eyes slightly. "Who's asking?" Malik took a deep breath. "We're here about Angela Porter. We need your help." At the mention of Angela's name, Carl's expression changed. His tired eyes widened slightly, and he stepped back, glancing around as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "Angela Porter?" he repeated in a hushed tone. "What do you kids know about Angela?" "We know she was framed," Malik said quickly. "And we know that people are after her because she's the only one who can expose the truth. Linda Marsh sent us. She said you were close to Angela, that you might know how to find her." Carl studied them for a long moment, his eyes searching their faces for signs of deception. Finally, he stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. "You'd better come inside." Malik and Jamal exchanged a quick glance before stepping into the house. The inside was small and cluttered, filled with old furniture and stacks of papers. Carl led them to a small kitchen table, where he gestured for them to sit. He poured himself a cup of coffee, his hands slightly trembling as he set the cup down in front of him. "So," Carl began, his voice still low, "Linda sent you. She always did have a soft spot for Angela. I haven't heard from Angela in years, not since everything went down, but I had a feeling she'd resurface one day." "Do you know where she is now?" Malik asked, his hope rising. Carl shook his head. She disappeared after the scandal. I tried to reach her, but she cut off all contact. I think she knew it was too dangerous to stay in touch with anyone who had been close to her. "But you were close to her, right?" Jamal asked. "You worked with her." Carl nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. "Yeah, we worked together for years on those housing projects. Angela was the real deal, honest, hardworking, cared about the people she was helping. That's why it killed her when she found out about the corruption. She couldn't stand the thought that people were using those funds to line their own pockets while families were struggling to make rent." "So what happened?" Malik asked, leaning forward. "How did she get framed?" Carl sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. It was Solomon. He was the mastermind behind everything. He had connections all over the place: city council, developers, even law enforcement. Angela started digging into the numbers and found out money was being funneled out of the housing projects into private accounts. When she confronted Solomon, he acted like he was going to investigate, but all he did was set her up to take the fall. "Why didn't anyone try to help her?" Jamal asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "People were scared," Carl admitted. "Solomon had power, and anyone who crossed him ended up like Angela, ruined, out of a job, and blacklisted. I tried to help her, but by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Solomon had already set the wheels in motion." Malik clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. "So now she's in hiding and Solomon's running for mayor. If she comes out, she'll be in danger." Carl nodded gravely. "That's right. If Solomon finds her, he'll make sure she doesn't talk. He'll do whatever it takes to protect his reputation and his political career." "Do you think there's anyone else who could help?" Malik asked, his voice urgent. "Someone who could give us more information or proof of what really happened?" Carl thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I wish I could say yes, but most of the people who were involved in those projects have either moved on or are too scared to talk. Solomon's got a long reach, and no one wants to be his next target." Malik felt the weight of Carl's words pressing down on him. They were running out of options, and Angela's enemies were getting closer. But then Carl leaned in, his eyes sharp again. "There's one thing, though," he said in a hushed voice. "Before Angela disappeared, she told me she had a backup plan. She knew that if things went south, she'd need to have proof, something solid to show the world that Solomon was behind it all. She mentioned having some kind of documents, but she didn't tell me where she hid them." Malik's heart skipped a beat. Documents? What kind of documents? I don't know for sure, Carl said. But if I had to guess, they're records, financial papers, contracts, emails, something that links Solomon to the missing funds. If Angela has them, she'll need those documents to prove her innocence. Malik's mind raced. Those documents were the key. If they could find them, they could clear Angela's name and bring down Solomon. But the question was, where had Angela hidden them? Do you have any idea where she might have put them? Malik asked, desperate for any lead. Carl hesitated, then nodded slowly. There was one place Angela used to go when she needed to clear her head, especially when things got tough. It was an old community center in the neighborhood where she grew up. She used to say it was her safe place. Malik and Jamal exchanged a glance. Where is it? Malik asked. Carl gave them the address. It's in the old part of town. The place has been abandoned for years, but if Angela left anything behind, it'd be there. Malik stood up, his heart pounding with determination. We need to find those documents. It's the only way to help her. Carl nodded, his face serious. Be careful. If Solomon's people are looking for her, they might be after those documents too. Malik and Jamal left Carl's house with a sense of urgency. They finally had a lead, a real chance to help Angela and stop Solomon. But they also knew they weren't the only ones searching. Time was running out, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Tomorrow, they would go to the old community center, and with any luck, they'd find the proof they needed to save Angela. The next day, Malik and Jamal stood outside the old community center. The building looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and paint peeling from the walls. Weeds had overtaken the small patch of land in front, and the whole place had an eerie, forgotten feel to it. This is it, Malik said, checking the address Carl had given them. His stomach churned with nervous energy. They were so close to finding the proof that could save Angela, but they knew they weren't the only ones looking. You ready for this? Jamal asked, though Malik could hear the tension in his friend's voice. Yeah, Malik replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Let's get this done. They walked up to the front door, which was padlocked shut. Jamal pulled out a small crowbar he'd brought, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. With a few quick motions, the lock popped open, and they slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The interior of the community center was dark and dusty, filled with old furniture and forgotten boxes. Malik's heart pounded as they carefully made their way through the empty rooms, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Every creak and sound made Malik's pulse quicken. He knew they weren't supposed to be here, but there was something bigger at stake now. She said this place was her safe spot, Malik whispered, scanning the room for any sign of where Angela might have hidden the documents. Think like Angela. Where would she put something no one would think to look? Jamal nodded, and they began their search. They rummaged through old cabinets, checked behind bookshelves, and peeked under loose floorboards. But so far, they hadn't found anything. Minutes turned into an hour, and Malik was starting to feel frustrated. What if they were wrong? What if the documents weren't here at all? But just as he was about to give up, Jamal called out, Yo, Malik, over here. Malik rushed over to where Jamal was standing near the back of the building. Jamal had found a small locked drawer in an old desk. The lock was rusty, and with a quick twist of the crowbar, it snapped open. Inside was a small metal box. Malik's heart raced as he lifted the box out and opened it. Inside were several folders filled with papers, contracts, bank statements, and email printouts. It was all there. The proof. Everything they needed to expose Solomon and clear Angela's name. We got it, Malik whispered, barely able to believe it. This is it. But just as they were about to celebrate, the sound of footsteps echoed through the empty building. Malik and Jamal froze. Someone else was here. They quickly shoved the papers back into the box and hid behind a stack of old chairs. Malik's heart pounded in his ears as he listened to the approaching footsteps. He peeked through a crack between the chairs and saw two men in dark suits walking into the room. It was them, Solomon's men, the same ones they'd seen in Lindenwood. They've got to be here, one of the men said, his voice low and tense. Keep looking. Malik's stomach dropped. They were after the documents, and if they found them, it was all over. He glanced at Jamal, who looked just as terrified, but there was no time to panic. They needed to get out of there with the proof. Slowly, Malik motioned for Jamal to follow him. They crawled toward the back door, keeping low and quiet, trying not to make a sound. The men were still searching the room, unaware that Malik and Jamal were slipping away. Just as they reached the door, one of the men spoke again. "They'll come for these eventually. We'll wait." Malik's heart skipped a beat. The men were going to stay here, waiting for Angela or anyone else who came looking for the documents. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Once they were outside, Malik and Jamal took off running, not stopping until they were several blocks away. They finally slowed down, gasping for breath as they ducked into an alley. "We need to get these to Angela," Malik said between breaths. "We've got the proof. But if they find her before we do—" "We won't let that happen," Jamal said, his voice firm. "We've come too far to lose now." They couldn't go back to the community center. Solomon's men were watching it. But now that they had the documents, they had something powerful, something that could bring Solomon down. "We need to find her," Malik said. "She's the only one who can use this." Jamal nodded, his face set with determination. "How do we get to her, though?" Malik thought for a moment, then remembered something Carl had said. Carl mentioned that Angela still had allies, people she trusted. "We need to get to one of them. They can help us reach her." They hurried to a nearby park and sat down on a bench to make a plan. Malik pulled out his phone and sent a message to Carl, explaining what had happened and that they had the documents. Minutes later, Carl replied, "Carl, good work. Meet me tonight at the old bus station. I'll help you get these to Angela." Malik felt a surge of relief. They were finally getting closer. With Carl's help, they could get the proof to Angela and expose Solomon for who he really was. Later that evening, Malik and Jamal made their way to the old bus station. It was dark and mostly deserted, the kind of place people avoided at night. Carl was waiting for them, leaning against a lamppost with his hands in his pockets. When he saw them approaching, he nodded in greeting. "You got the documents?" Carl asked. Malik nodded, handing him the metal box. Carl opened it, glancing through the papers, his face grim but satisfied. "This is it," Carl said. "You two did good. Now we just need to get these to Angela." "Where is she?" Malik asked, his voice anxious. "Is she safe?" Carl looked around cautiously. "She's been hiding, moving from place to place to avoid being caught. But now that we have these, we can bring her out of hiding. Solomon's finished." Just as Carl spoke, a car pulled up in the distance. Malik's heart raced, but then he saw the door open, and a woman stepped out. It was Angela. Malik's breath caught in his throat. She looked tired, worn down from years of running, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She approached them slowly, her gaze shifting from Carl to Malik and Jamal. "You found it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of everything they had been through to get to this moment. "We couldn't just leave you," he said softly. "You didn't deserve what happened to you." Angela's eyes softened, and she smiled, a small, grateful smile that made everything worth it. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You don't know how much this means." Carl handed her the documents, and for the first time in years, Angela looked like she could finally breathe. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice steady and determined. "Solomon's going to pay for what he did." Malik and Jamal exchanged a look, knowing that they had done something important, something that mattered. They had helped save a life, and with Angela's strength and the proof in their hands, Solomon's days of corruption were numbered. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I work hard on these stories, and your support means a lot to me. Thank you for being part of this journey.